Well, kia ora everybody. Welcome back to our Committee of Council. We'll now go back to our order of business. I haven't had any notification of additional items, so there are none. Declarations of interest, I haven't had any either. So we'll now, and same with public comment. So we will now move to the amended minutes of the 8th of May 2020. And I'm just waiting for it to come up on the screen. There is a memo presented by Governance Manager. That is on page 7. I'll take that as being read. And the recommendation to us is that the amended minutes of the ordinary meeting of the 8th of May 2020 Part 1 public be confirmed as a true and accurate record. I'll look to move it, seconded by Councillor Dennison. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we'll just do this by voice. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Against? And that is carried. Okay, we will now move to the major part of the meeting, which is finalising the annual budget plan for 2020-21. Sorry, I'm jumping. Number 6, confirmation of the normal minutes, that the minutes of the Committee of Council meeting of the 21st of May 2020 Part 1 public be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Do we actually physically have a copy of those? We do.
Sorry, no, I'm referring to item number 6. And there is no. It jumps from item 5 to item 7. Yes, but they need to be specifically at the meeting. Yes, yeah. Yeah, okay, so.
If we just wait one moment, technology will catch up with us.
Is it not on page 21 of the agenda that we've got? It just isn't, hasn't got a thing at the top saying item 6, but it is actually the minutes of the 20th of May. Am I on the hub? I've got an electronic copy. Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I think the confusion is that for the record, it needs to be quite clear what's what, because what is in the public domain currently is the item 7, which relates to the next item. So there is no physical item 6. So, but if they're on hub, then it needs to be reflected.
Can we get them up online? Sorry, councillors, we're just going to get them up online here now. I think it's the Deputy Mayor's right, we should need to cite them. Excellent, thank you. So we have these minutes of Committee of Council, Part 1 Public, from the 20th of May 2020. Could we just scroll through those, please? All right, if I could just confirm from governance that they'll be emailed to councillors, and that will be available online as well. I'm quite happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll ask for any matters arising. Councillor Naylor.
I've just noticed on page 22, on the motion that the Chief Executive be instructed to make the 550k reduction, it doesn't appear to have recorded Councillor Beattie as the mover of that motion. It's got recorded moved Tangi Itakiri and seconded Karen Naylor, and we moved and seconded the amendment to that recommendation, but I believe that Councillor Beattie was the initial mover of that motion.
Okay, we can adjust that. It's reasonably academic, but we can. It says moved by Councillor Beattie, seconded by myself, which was the substantive motion, I think.
Yeah. It says that. Oh no, that's the submission. Sorry. So that's the next one down. Oh, it's great. Oh, it's not. If you go down a bit. Wait, she keeps saying, you just stop.
Motion, resolution number 1 and resolution 2 were both voted. Seconded. Yeah. So we'll just need now. See how it says
So what we've got, councillors, is recommendation number 1 was moved by Councillor Beattie, seconded by myself, and that was also for number 2.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, may I just clarify?
Just one moment.
Okay.
Sorry, could you just go move this up? No, up please to number 1. And the one above it, thank you. Just okay, so we were moving the annual budget, and then which was moved by myself, seconded by Deputy Mayor, and then number 1, which was moved by Councillor Beattie, seconded by myself.
No, Mr. Mayor, sorry, it's just I think the confusion comes from the fact that the mover and the seconder are listed above the committee resolved each time. And so it looks like it's an addendum to the bit before, but it's actually the bit that's coming. So if where it says move Susan Beattie, seconded Grant Smith, the committee resolved to, that's what it's referring to. And same when you go up to number 1, it's the same, but because it's in small print above the big capitals, it looks like it's part of the previous bit before, but it refers to the bit under it.
I'm comfortable with that. Again, relatively academic because it has happened, but I'm quite happy to have that corrected. Are you fine with that?
It doesn't have to be, it's correct.
It is correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So are there any other matters arising? Councillor Dennison?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, just seeing that in the recommendation, I understand, at least in the minutes, on the order paper, is 21st of May, but I believe the meeting date was the 20th of May, Wednesday, the 20th. We had 2 days set aside for it, but I believe it should read the 20th of May.
Which page are you referring to, Councillor?
I'm referring to, because I haven't actually read the minutes, but in the order paper, that's all I can go on item 6 on the agenda.
No, could we just go to what we're resolving, which is up here, please? If that is, I mean, I'll take your advice if it is correct.
It's not referring to that. I'm just referring to accepting the minutes, and it says of the 21st of May, and I'm saying it should be the minutes of the 20th of May.
Yeah.
Okay, well maybe it's only the order of business that is wrong. The order of business is wrong, right?
The republished versions.
I haven't had the item. I haven't seen the item.
Okay, councillors, we will put the resolution up. Can I have that back on screen, please? Thank you. If I could just ask if these could be added to the minutes next time formally, please. We wouldn't be going through this otherwise. Okay, I think we are in the correct space now. Item 6, the minutes of the 20th of May, 2020, the minutes of the Committee of Council meeting of the 20th of May 2020, Part 1, public be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm moving that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any further matters arising? Okay, we'll do this by voice. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That is carried. Thank you. Right, we'll move to number 7, the main order of business. Finalising the annual plan budget for the 2020-21 financial year. We have a memo on page 21, as well as a rather large appendix there around our year 3 of the 10-year plan. There's a memo there from our CFO, Stuart McKinnon. Page 21, Stuart, floor's yours.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a little bit too nervous to speak now. Right, so yes, today's the day, I guess the big day from our perspective, where we're asking you to approve the budget for 2021. I'm not going to go on too much, but there's a few things I do want to say before we get into your conversation. The plan presented to you as the appendix includes all of the changes approved at the Council Committee meetings, including the additional $550,000 that we were asked to save. The supporting information adopted in March has been updated to incorporate all of these changes. So we're sitting with a planned proposed rates increase of 1.95%. Largely what we're asking you to do today, is reasonably procedural, and recommendation 2 talks about the balanced budget. So the local government legislation requires council to formally adopt the budget, and if it's in a deficit situation, to formally approve that they're comfortable that that's a prudent thing to do. So you'll notice our budgeted deficit in the statement of revenue expense at the moment is 3.94 million, and when you add the vested assets and development contribution revenue, which you're not allowed to use as a rates calculation in terms of a balanced budget. It's 6 point something million. Confession time, I suppose. When we met last time, we put a statement of revenue and expenditure on the board, and it gave you the impression that we were in a surplus situation. And so it's reasonable to ask what's changed. And what had happened is the depreciation number in what we had brushed together for you was incorrect. And it was based on old asset values before revaluations were done. And I guess we spotted it between that meeting and now. And so it fundamentally doesn't change the rates increase, or fundamentally doesn't change the cash position of council. And so as Chief Financial Officer, while I apologise for the error, these things sometimes happen, and it's a learning for us to be a bit more cautious and careful. It fundamentally doesn't change the accounts, and the reason for that is that we don't fund depreciation, we fund actual expenditure on renewal. And part of the reason we're in a deficit now is it's pretty clear and obvious to us where that's come from, and it's slightly intentional. And so the difference between depreciation and renewal numbers is quite big. There's some valid reasons for that, but perhaps you could argue some of the funding reasons are a bit of a concern, and we will have to deal with that going forward. And we also have this ERP project, which we're going to fund over 7 years. And so in a normal course of business, if we have operating expenditure, we fund it straight away. In this case, there's a $2 million gap there, and that's also contributing to what is a reasonably big deficit. I guess the thing, I don't want to make it alarming, I guess it's just new news to you. You did this last year, so we're currently budgeting a deficit position as well. So it's nothing new. I guess I just wanted to put some clarity around the fact that we perhaps led you slightly astray by having the depreciation number not quite being accurate when we presented it 2 weeks ago. So the cause is twofold. You were asked to resolve that it's financially prudent to budget for a deficit. It is a legislative requirement. I guess from our perspective, given the cause of the deficit is well understood and somewhat intentional, officers are comfortable to recommend that this be approved. And just bear in mind, it's not a new thing for this council. It's business as usual to some extent. So today we're asking you to formally recommend into council the recommendations in front of you, in particular that this budget be adopted. Small changes to the wording in the appendix document can be accommodated. And these final version will be sent to council on the 24th of June to the full council meeting. At the full council meeting on the 24th, we'll be asking council to specifically approve the setting of rates. And also a important procedural thing to do. So the rates are not being set today, the budget is being set today. And that's really all I wanted to add.
Thank you, Stuart. I'll open it up for questions, but I'll start with one myself. So obviously, understanding balance sheets and how things work, this is not a cash deficit. This is very much a paper deficit. Would that be correct?
From our perspective, absolutely. Yeah. Depreciation's a funny concept. It's an accounting concept.
Yeah.
And because we don't fund it, it actually has no material impact on us. If we funded it, we might be having a different conversation. But we don't. We fund specifically what we're renewing, and therefore the depreciation number is really just an accounting concept.
Yeah, and that's a local government policy. We're not the only one that does that.
We're probably not the only one, but we're slightly unique, I guess, in terms of how we fund it, around funding our depreciations over an average of the coming 3 years. But different councils fund their renewals in different ways. Some actually do fund depreciation and create reserve accounts. And so, yeah, we're not unique, but we're not with the norm either. Everybody does things differently. And
with Audit New Zealand, there should be no issues?
There'll be no issues.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I'll open it up for any questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I do have a number of questions, so if you want to sort of chop me off at some point and let someone else have a go, I can come back in later. So my first question is about table 1 in the itemised 550,000 reduction in OPEX that's come to us at this meeting. And there's a 102,000 adjustment to salaries and wages. And I just want to know how that is going to be saved. Are we looking at redundancies? Are we looking at cutting people's wages?
We're not looking. Can you hear me? We're not looking at cutting people's wages, but we are looking at efficiencies within the organisation. And I think I said last time, and I will say it again, we aren't ruling anything out in terms of efficiencies around staff numbers.
Okay, thank you. The second question relating to that table is that at the top there's an increased net revenue assumption, a small amount. When we had the original loss of revenue assumption, it was 2.4 million, and which is detailed on page 31 of the annual budget, and that was on the assumption that level 2 restrictions would continue until December. Now, given that we're now in level 1, I'm wondering if the increased net revenue assumption in table 1 is still correct.
It's still based on the best estimates we have. So even though we're at level 1, if you look at the venues, for example, we don't have stacks of bookings ready to go tomorrow. It's going to take some time before things, I guess, I don't want to use the term get back to normal because we're trying to avoid that. There's a new normal, I suppose. But in terms of putting those revenue assumptions back, we have looked at the original assumptions, and there's a few areas there that you can see where we think it's not going to be as bad as we originally anticipated, and that's why those numbers have come back.
Well, I accept that answer, although it seems to me that that's a very small amount coming back out of a 2.4 loss for a 6-month period, and I'm wondering if that's a little bit conservative.
Normally budgets are conservative, councillor. I think that would be my addition to the answer. Just having dealt with a couple of big event organisers just recently with coming down to level 1, it's very hard to turn things on really quickly. We've lost a big netball game, and it's because we just literally can't turn things on quickly.
Well, with respect, Mr. Mayor, that may be true as regards events, but it's not true, for example, regarding building consents. So there's a very significant revenue loss assumed under building consents, which table 1 doesn't really mitigate much. So if you compare page 31 of the annual plan to the annual budget, rather, compared to the building consents, I just feel that these numbers are. I wonder if these numbers are accurate, or is there going to be less revenue loss than we expected, and therefore a little bit more room for manoeuvre in the budget, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer is nobody has a crystal ball. And so in terms of the revenue loss assumptions that we've put in there, there's been communication with the direct teams, with Lee from Building, for example, to say what's going on, what's your best guess at what's happening. And we believe in Building in particular is potentially a bit of a bounce right now, as there has been a gap. And the reality is we don't really know, and that's the truth of it. And so there is perhaps an element of slight conservatism in there, but it's a shared view of the officers and the officers who are in that space to say that that's a reality. Building in particular, if you look at that, the original revenue assumption from that was increased 20% over the current year. And so it already had a massive, perceived increase in value. And now we're saying perhaps that was a bit over ambitious. And so there's been some wind back from that. And so it's ebbing and flowing as we try and get more information and learn more about what the situation means to us. It's fair to say that perhaps it is, it could be on the conservative side, but we don't know. We're just putting our best foot forward and saying this is the best we can come up with.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the reduction in the library budget, so which refers to the annual budget document. So there's two sets of figures. So on page 15, it talks about reduction in the library budget renewals of $298,000. And on page 54, there's a list of 4 library programs that have been reduced, which adds up to 238,000. So I'm wondering if you can tell me, is there more reduction in library renewals elsewhere that hasn't been obvious to me, or what's the total reduction in the library renewals? Is it 238,000 or is it 298,000? So page 15 is 298,000 and page 54, there's 4 programs that add up to 238,000.
I'm guessing, and I'm looking for Grant for confirmation. Are we? Sorry, I'm sorry about the process. I'm just looking at Grant. The comparison on page 54 is with the 10-year plan. And I'm wondering if the number on page 15 is comparison with the original draft that we put out.
Okay, that would explain it. Yeah, thank you. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Am I right to keep going, Mr. Mayor? So for the affordability benchmark discussion on page 22 of the annual budget document, there's the rates affordability benchmark increases. Total rates will increase by no more than local government cost index plus growth plus 2%. Can you tell me what that figure is for this year? The local government cost index plus growth plus 2%? Because it says it's met, but I don't know what the actual target or that it has to come under is.
4.5%.
4.5%. Okay, thank you. Now, on page 29 of the whole of council financial statements, page 29, for connected communities, what's that? There's a reduction in the annual budget compared to the 10-year plan of about $800,000 in operating expenditure. And I'm wondering what that refers to. So further on, it does talk about internal changes on page 52. But I'm just wondering if there's any cuts to the level of service or any programs that have been deleted there.
I'm looking at the team. I can confirm that there's been no service level cuts, absolutely. And I suspect the description is talking about some overhead allocations from the rest of the organisation. And there has been, in some areas, and this is one of them, some substantial changes, I guess, in the assumptions about how that overhead is allocated. There's been some restructures throughout the organisation, as you know. Yeah. And so they're not service level related. They're just purely in terms of how we allocate those overhead costs to activities.
No, that's fine. I assume that that's what it was, but I'm sure that people in the community will ask me why there's a smaller amount going to community than was planned. So I wanted to make sure that that was the transparent answer. So on page 35, programme 279, Citywide minor road projects, that's been reduced from 851,000 to 200,000. And I have asked questions about this before, and the officer did say that there'll be a new programme going into the long-term plan, so that will be the year after this. So I'm wanting to know what effect that will have in the coming financial year to reduce that budget from 800, because it's a capital new budget, from 851 to 200,000. What are we not going to be doing?
Can I ask Robert to answer this?
Well, we'll essentially do a much smaller number of treatments. Yes.
Sorry, what was that? It will constrain.
It will limit what we do. So, a smaller number of treatments.
Okay, so my understanding is that that was put forward as a budget cut on the grounds of the pandemic need for reduction in budget, but it is a capital new budget line. And so what's the rating impact of making that cut, either in terms of a saving or whatever? So it's fundamentally it's 621,000 capital cut. So
I'll ask Grant Jensen, but it's probably of the order of 60,000 odd, would it? So possibly 30,000, given it's half NZTA funded. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Am I right to keep going?
How many more?
3.
Go for it.
So on page, glad I'm providing entertainment. On page 54, and this is a sort of a general question, although in this case it's specifically about the Connected Communities budget, but it applies across the board. I see that there are quite a lot of carry forwards and deferrals, and I'm wondering if we have a calculation of what the consequences of these deferrals are for future rates rises, particularly say next year. So you can see on the bottom of page 54 there's a whole lot of carry forwards and there are deferrals all through the budget, but as far as I'm aware, we haven't heard what effect that might have on next year's rates.
Next year, you're talking 2021?
No.
21-22,
yeah.
The answer is 21-22 is a long-term plan,
Mm-hmm.
and everything is looked at afresh. And so in terms of these carry forwards, right, so from a funding perspective, these are already funded. And so you've collected the money over the last 3 years to pay for these. The work should have been done this year. It hasn't been for various reasons. And therefore, in terms of putting them into the budget for next year, they basically have a zero rates impact.
Okay, so for the carry forwards,
borrowing
yeah.
right now, for example. And so for 2021,
Mm-hmm.
the rates impact of doing carry forwards is not
Okay.
really there. For 21-22, I guess the reason I'm not specifically answering in relation to these renewals is because the renewals will be looked at in their entirety again. There's no connection, I guess, between this budget and the 21-22 budget. We expect you to look at everything from new.
Well, I am aware of that, but I suppose I'm concerned that we might be pushing off renewals now and be paying the bill later. And to some degree, your comment at the start about not funding depreciation and why we've got a deficit links into that we aren't actually spending as much money on renewals in this budget as perhaps we should be.
Yeah, I'll avoid answering that question directly, but because it's a long-term plan question for us all, I guess in terms of this carry forward though, in this case, by carrying them forward, we're still going to be doing the work. So we've collected the money, we're going to do the work. And so there's no, I guess, I don't want to use the word net deficit, but there's no catch up required. You collect the money, you do the work, the renewals are as expected. It's just a year later than we expected to.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question then, second to last, Mr. Mayor, which also relates to page 54, and it's around community centres. Programme 265, Citywide Community Centre Refurbishments, and that budget has been reduced from what was planned by 173,000. It says reassessment of actual maintenance requirements results in reduced budget. Given the current sort of renewal state of the community centres, I'm just wondering how it is that we've suddenly decided that we only need about half the budget to do the refurbishments.
I can answer that, councillors. So we're going through a bit of a realignment and consistency sort of program at the moment over all of our portfolio, and same thing to do with the community centres. So when we're actually going in and doing condition assessments and actually getting a pretty good handle on what the condition of our assets are, some of the planned works that were initially flagged in the LTP don't actually need to be done yet. So they're actually, the condition is eroded at a lesser state, I suppose, than we originally planned. So that was, we're still carrying through a pretty reasonable budget over our portfolio. This year as well, we've managed to update in a lot more, I guess, totality some of our centres. So Milson's has been given a very considerable upgrade. So some of those ones that were originally, I guess, flagged to slowly bit piece them over time, we've actually managed to do through a more sort of comprehensive upgrade at once. So that's sort of meaning we can get away with not having to do as much next year.
Okay, so that's a reassessment rather than a budget cut?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then that you'll be pleased to hear is it for the time being, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just have two questions. And thanks, Stuart, for the reports. The first one relates to page 30 of the supporting information and the outline of the renewal, capital renewals of 23.7 million, which is slightly ahead of what was planned in the LTP. I'm just looking across at how that's funded. On the right-hand side of the page there, it says that rates funded by 19.955 million at our overall capital, which is obviously a bit less than what we're undertaking in terms of renewals. I had understood our general policy was to rates fund all of the capital renewals, but so that falls short. So I'm just wondering if you'd be happy to explain how much of those renewals will be funded by debt or how they'd be funded.
Sure. The short answer is none will be funded by debt for two reasons. One is on the right-hand column, right down the bottom, the top row, external revenue for renewals is funding coming in, mostly NZTA, I suspect, in terms of that. So if you add that to your 19.9 number, you end up with 22.7-ish. And you'll also be aware of the previous conversation just then where there are a number of carry forwards where funding's already been raised, and so theoretically we have a little bit of money in the bank with which to pay for them. However, we do run a central treasury model, and so that's where the funding strategy is so important in terms of how we fund these things long term. And so, you know, we borrow for money as we need it. The timing's sometimes different, and so I guess from a financial strategy point of view, we don't borrow for renewals at all.
Yep, that's good to know. Thank you. And just the second question relates to the Streets for People, the City Centre Streetscape Plan, items on page 35. With the adoption of the Appendix 3 that we adopted 3 weeks ago, the changes, I understand that meant that all the construction programs for the streetscape have been deferred. And apart from that 500,000 on the program 244, which I understand from the commentary at the bottom is for the design package. And I'm just wanting to double check if that 500,000 is adequate budget for what's intended in the coming year for design.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can answer that question. We believe that the 500 is adequate for the portion that we're looking at doing next financial year. We, as discussed in the Infrastructure Committee last week, we're estimating that we'll have an engagement of a consultant November-ish. Likely that they won't actually starting to produce work until early in the new year, and we believe that the 500,000 would be adequate to cover the costs for that engagement for the financial year.
Thank you. That's great to have that reassurance. Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first question is following Councillor Johnson's first question, because I was asked this question in the public, whether council is thinking of laying off any staff. I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what does it mean that due to efficiencies or increased efficiency. If we are using the same resource and getting more efficiency, does it mean that we were not using the 100% efficiency of the existing staff previously?
No, that's not what I meant at all. Two things are, one, we do have an efficiency program that we are looking at the moment in terms of how we're operating in our organisation, and that includes both resources that are spent, you know, and things that we buy, and how we do that through a procurement process. We're also looking at different ways of operating our structure. It would be it's not appropriate for me to speak in a public forum about anything to do with employment issues. And I think that councillors are aware of that in terms of your briefing that you received last year around employment law, and I cannot and will not talk in any specifics about people and organisational structures. But what I have said is we have to make efficiencies because the council have asked us to do that in order to reduce our rates for our ratepayers. And that comes at a cost to us all. And those are the decisions as the chief executive that I have to make in consultation with my senior team and the people within the organisation. And so we will be looking at that, and we've already started to look at that, and we're looking at how we can make those efficiencies. But this is I have to cut the cloth, and it's what I'm doing.
All right, thank you. My second question is about the budget document we have been provided. It's just out of my curiosity. Page 12 in last paragraph, where we are discussing the submissions, different submissions on different issues. For every other sector, we have definite number of submitters or submissions, 6, 12, 21. But when it comes to environmental sustainability and climate change, it says a dozen or so. We don't know how many submissions were there exactly. Does it mean that we are not prioritizing this sector, or we are not taking care properly of this sector, or it's just a...
I suspect what it means is that a number of people have done submissions about direct things, and it's been pretty clear in a lot of them about what their submissions refer to. Occasionally, in environmental areas, they put the odd comment or two, and I think we've been perhaps a little bit scared to say, yes, that was a definite submission about this area, because it just links in. But what we can do coming out of here is confirm that and get a bit more certainty if we can, so that we're not saying also. I think that's possible to do, so we'll look to do that before the 24th of June.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, councillors. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just had one question, relates to some of the detail in the annual budget document. Page 61 has program 764 in it around citywide council facility energy use monitoring. And just noting that budget has been increased, and the rationale given there around increasing monitoring of energy use. My question is, what of our council facilities does that budget now cover? And just seeing, for instance, we've got the list of council facilities in the vape and smoke policy coming up, which includes, obviously the building we're in, the central administration building, the library, all the CCO buildings, wild base, the stomach, et cetera, et cetera. Does that budget actually allow us to deliver an energy monitoring service across all those facilities, or only a portion of those facilities?
I am desperately looking around the room for someone to answer this who knows more than I do. I suspect it's for all of them, but we may need, I'm looking at Tom's face to see if he knows the answer. I'm not sure he does either. We may need to come back to you on that, Brent, is the answer.
that budget is not sufficient to provide energy monitoring across the whole of our assets. So there will be an element of understanding the best way to optimise that budget, and getting the best bang for buck.
Right. Thank you.
Once we're getting, yeah, cool.
That's helpful enough. Mr. Mayor.
All right, where are we? Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for the answers to all of the questions that have come already. It was a question really about page 40 and probably looking for comment potentially from the GM Marketing and Communications, because my question is about, following a previous question, the implications of this early move to level 1, where our cuts to budget reductions, I should say, rather than cuts, sounds much more polite. Reduction in budgets for events across our Palmy Unleashed, not major events, they stayed the same, but community events and our events funds in particular areas, they were reduced anticipating a longer level 2. And obviously level 1 now sees us able to have not just the small events we were anticipating, but large scale events much sooner. So really looking for a comment as to whether that budget, in light of this week's move, is actually sufficient for what we need to achieve in terms of the economic impact of those events.
In terms of large-scale events, the whole industry has obviously had to adapt to these COVID alert levels. And a lot of long-term planning events, I know the Mayor mentioned about the netball event being cancelled in terms of our venue hire. These things can't get turned on just because the alert level changed. There's a lot of planning and organisation and travel and player availability and all these other stakeholders involved in supply of large-scale events that we put on. So whilst alert levels may change quickly, it doesn't necessarily mean that the partners that we're involved with can respond as quickly. So that's just one point I want to make around large-scale events. For council events ourselves, we've rationalised under the current economic climate to make sure that, and there were some events that were increased in funding because of specific reasons, for example, military heritage, the 100 years, they were budgets that were escalated more than probably normal. So they've now resumed back to a normal level. And so within our budget savings, we've been able to incorporate, I guess, those reductions and the cost towards those events, knowing that they were escalated previously to allow for greater celebrations and so on. Just looking at the list here, we have, I guess, tried to maintain and be efficient as much as possible. And we've been learning along the way in terms of what we can deliver, making sure every dollar counts. So we've been, I guess, looking at how we can improve what we're doing. We're bringing a lot more work in-house in terms of delivery instead of having to pay for it externally. And so this budget is a result of those assessments as well.
So can we be assured that there's enough flexibility in the budgets that are set here to allow us to adapt with the changing environment?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm completely confident with that.
And would that certainty flow through to the movement we're seeing in events, taking, for example, the Jazz Festival, which has just announced they've moved dates, they've reformatted, but then I imagine next year they'll come again in their old form, and that doesn't really line up with our budget lines. Have we flexibility to respond to that kind of changing situation?
I wonder if I could just interlude here slightly. I appreciate the line of questioning. However, there was a lot of pressure on officers to reduce costs, and things have changed since that occurred. And I'm not trying to disrupt the line of questioning necessarily, but the budget is based on a certain set of assumptions, and the line of questioning we're getting now was around changing those assumptions. And so the reality is the events budget was reduced slightly because of the effects of COVID and the need to find cost savings, and Sasha has done that by trying to find efficiency savings within her operation.
Thank you for the comment. I suppose my point is that our assumptions might have been slightly wrong. And what I want to know is, without going back to the budget, have we got flexibility in those numbers that are sitting there to allow us to deal with our possibly incorrect assumptions?
Council, that's very hard to answer.
Well, I think the General Manager said, yes, she feels there is flexibility in the budget.
This is set, you know, in terms of, you know, this is what we're working to. And, you know, this is not something that is going to scale up or scale it down. This is what we are working to in terms of reducing costs for council. And we're taking on more responsibility and doing more work and operating in a more efficient way to deliver the services that are required to make sure that we maintain a good level of events at a quality that we will be proud of delivering.
Thank you.
Can I just have the CE just make a comment?
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment. I mean, a couple of things. Firstly, if we find ourselves flushed with revenue and running enormous surpluses, I'm sure that we will come back to the table and there will be opportunities for councillors to discuss what they might do with those. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we were, following on from the CFO, asked to make this cut. You can't go from 4.4 down to 1.95 without it impacting both internally and some of the external things that we did. And we were really careful, and you know, some of this was really hard for officers to think we've got to cut some of this stuff off because they put a lot into this. So we have done what was required, and it does mean in some area, you know, in all areas, everybody's had to make some sacrifices, and this is one.
All right, thank you. Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Stuart, for this, for all the work you've done with this. I just had a question for page 87 of the budget document. I'll just swing to it. Around rates penalties. And around just looking at that and around the payment options, I think it was page 85. What is the process that council has if people are unable to pay their rates?
Yep, good question. So, interestingly, I'll tell a little story and then I'll answer your question properly. In terms of the fourth quarter instalment and what's happened with COVID, in a normal course of events, if we hadn't had a pandemic and things were normal, we would the payments for the fourth quarter instalment were due 27th or 29th of May. We would by now have just shoved a 10% penalty on as some incentive to get people to pay. What we've done this time is we have not yet applied that penalty. We are writing to everybody who hasn't paid right now and asking them to contact us urgently to try and establish whether they can, whether they need some help, or whether they're able to pay, or whether they're just refusing to pay. And so from a process point of view, given the pandemic, we've set up a little team of people within my team who we're giving ratepayers a bit more leeway as support, I guess, time to pay their bills before we apply that penalty. And so we attempted to do that through the letter that we released with those fourth instalment rates invoices to ask people to contact us. We had about 45 people contact us to say they're having difficulty. We're giving them extended time and no penalties with which to catch up. And we're still trying to do that as a pandemic response to show a little bit more sympathy to ratepayers and not necessarily just chase the penalty revenue, because that's not really what we're all about. So in terms of process, because of COVID, we've changed our process somewhat. We wouldn't normally do that previously, but we're now, we are legally obliged to commit that penalty, what we're not legally obliged to do is the date with which to do it. So at the moment, there's a letter going out today to everybody who's missed their 4th instalment, asking them to either pay or contact us and get into some kind of payment arrangement to make that happen.
Cool, thank you for that. So would it be possible to add a kind of sentence in that, sorry, it was page 87 for the councillors. Would it be possible to add a kind of sentence in that under number 8 rates penalties that says if you are struggling due to the effects of COVID, please get in touch with council? Is that something that is possible to just add in there?
Just looking to see whether Steve can help with that. Is it possible to add a sentence and to suggest people who may be struggling to pay their rates because of COVID that we would...
Council, we've already done that. There's been quite a lot of...
Yeah, I'm wondering, Steve, if this is more...
It's not really something...
Yeah, this is more to do with the rate setting and the legislative process in terms of what's in the plan, and what you're suggesting is procedural. And so from a procedural perspective, we're certainly doing that. I guess I'm just a bit wary of mixing procedure with process about adding that sentence there.
Could I just add something there? I think there is a way of achieving what you would like achieved that's not necessarily in this document. For instance, in the letter that I sent out with the rates, we could reiterate that in the next instalment. We can reiterate that in press in other types of communication to ensure that what you're suggesting, and we've already done some of that we continue to do that and continue to reinforce that message.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to congratulate the CE and the staff on what they've done today. Well done. Not supposed to say a comment, but I just did one. Just want to ask a question around venues, following up on what Councillor Johnson did, around incentives and whether we could, and whether there was a chance to put an incentive program around, and I don't know whether that is being done to try and attract people back in. And I don't know if that is a 10% discount. Don't know, just putting it out there in order to get people back into the venues. I'm just thinking from a commercial point of view, what has been done, whether it's been done, is there a chance to get people back in? What are we doing? So, and also thinking about the regent as well, how do we get people back? Because that's what we want to do, is trying to get people back to get the money back in the register.
So in terms of venues, so the arena and conference and function centre, there's certainly, I guess, the incentive program. We have a community rate, obviously, with our venues, but also, to be fair, there is, I guess, a couple of things that we can do to help assist. One of them is the marketing and improving and really activating a strong marketing campaign around our venues, and that they're open for business and community use, obviously. So we're putting together a new marketing and sales strategy around that. In addition, we've put together a document which includes all the city's venues, including parks, outdoor spaces, getting people out and about and getting back into public space, because I think there's a level of confidence that needs to happen within the community to get back out. I think we're seeing, I guess, people readjusting, and so from that perspective, I think that's where the strategy should lie in terms of the increased promotion and marketing of these things, because I think people do want to get out. I think we'll see people exponentially returning to venues and going to entertainment centres and things like that. We're just seeing, I guess, a little bit of human behaviour, which is that cautiousness, and I think marketing will be, I'd like to see the emphasis in that to promote the spaces and places within the city.
Just to follow up, and also include the pools, because I think people are too scared to go and use the swimming pool as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, councillors, any further questions before we go to our resolutions and a couple of amendments which have just popped up? So we have the resolutions there, but before we do that, we have two amendments. And if I could have those up, please. The first one is from Councillor Rutherford. Would you like to speak to this one, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, so this is a new program that everybody will be aware of, that we reduced by about 650,000. We've just heard this morning that the rating impact on this is only about 1,000, so it's absolutely minimal. And I guess we also heard last week some of the potential impacts of the reduction of this program. And we know that this program is also one that is used a lot, oversubscribed. It's one that we have increased in the previous years. And I guess it's been really clear, especially through comments that Councillor Johnson has made, that the impact of cutting this budget is quite significant. If we think about many of the, not complaints, but many of the pieces of feedback we receive from our community, they are related to things like accessibility, footpaths, potholes. It's related to, I guess, work that could be fixed or addressed through this budget. And when I think about how much we might need to put into something like a comms plan to address reputational issues of, poor accessibility for pedestrian, cyclist, road users in the city, that actually, when you look at the rating impact of this program, it is better to reinstate this program. We've done some really great work around accessibility of the city in recent years, especially with work around footpaths, addressing budget issues, understanding actually what the condition of them are. And I just feel like if we continue down the path of leaving this at 200k, then we are going to be undoing some really great work that we have been doing. So I'm testing the waters and looking at reinstating this one.
Okay, councillors, anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I obviously support this, mostly because this is a budget that we have too many requests for already, and that's at the 851,000. And it's a budget that gives us an ability to respond to requests for small improvements for roading, safety improvements. And I feel that if we don't restore this budget, we're going to be in the situation the next financial year of having multiple requests coming to council for small amounts of money to do X and Y, because we haven't allowed the flexibility within this budget. It's a budget that's always under pressure, and it's not a huge capital budget. It doesn't have a significant rating impact compared to, say, an operational budget. And as well as that, it's linked to NZTA funding. So I think that we would be foolish to cut this, because we'll end up in a situation of having to restore it piecemeal throughout the year. And it's better to budget for it at the start rather than end up in a situation where we can't respond to what are relatively minor interventions to improve safety in the city.
I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor. Look, I'll just comment. I'm somewhat frustrated that we're relitigating things after we've made a decision. I appreciate the councillor's comments, and I don't disagree with the truth in them. But we asked officers for the saving reduction, so we would keep pet projects, and this has been mentioned many times by the particular councillors bringing it up. So we wouldn't get political projects in the way. I'm going to reserve my judgment until I ask the officers. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to do this. What does this affect with rates? I mean, what numbers are we talking?
The answer is we're not talking about a huge number in terms of rates, because some of it is potentially NZTA funded, has some external revenue, and the rest is capital new and borrowed. And so the impact while we're doing it on the fly, is probably in the $10,000 to $20,000 mark.
All right. Thank you. I just remind councillors we've got to cut our cloth. I mean, this is getting into silly stuff by trying to relitigate stuff. Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
That's okay, you asked the question I was going to ask.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Normally, I mean, I've been fighting to get the budget down, which...
Can you turn it on? Hold it high.
Hi, okay, you're right now. I've been fighting to get the rates down, and we've been going through a lot of information, and I must admit, looking at this one, I didn't take a lot of notice of it at the time. And now that I've had feedback and looked at the reports and yes, we do get a lot of complaints. We just had a community meeting last night. I won't say where, but, you know, a lot of those people were mentioning that they're out there walking now a lot more than they were before. And so, you know, I think this one it's our core business, and you're looking at less than 30,000 when you're looking at the interest and the NZTA funding. So it's not even going to dent that 1.95. So at this stage, I will support it.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am speaking in support of this motion, and I won't repeat what colleagues have said. But what I will add is that the way to avoid political decision making is to give officers a budget to work within, because otherwise every minor road improvement will arrive in this chamber with their community of interest, and that will be political decision making. So the way to avoid that is to give the officers the room to work.
Councillor Johnson?
Could I just have an additional comment, please?
No, sorry, we've done comments. I'm sorry. So this is an amendment, so there's no right to reply. I'll do it by division, if that's please. So I'll just ask Governance Manager to do that, please.
Councillor Dingwall.
4.
4. Councillor Butt. 4. Councillor Rutherford.
4.
4. Mayor Smith.
4.
4. Deputy Mayor Takiri.
4.
4. Councillor Meehan.
4.
4. Councillor Petrinas.
4.
4. Councillor Barrett.
4.
4. Councillor Hancock.
4.
4. Councillor Harpeter. 4. Councillor Naylor.
4.
4. Councillor Dennison.
4.
4. Councillor Johnson.
4.
4. Councillor Bowen.
4.
Councillor Beattie. 4.
And that has passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right. We will now move to the second amendment. And that is around library renewals for program 188 be restored to the 10-year plan budget of 885. And that is Councillor Johnson and second by Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Johnson, you do speak to that.
Thanks, Mr. I'll just preface my speaking to this by saying that we did not have the opportunity to debate individual items on the Appendix 4 that was presented by staff at the Committee of Council meeting on the 20th of May, and that has resulted in the relitigation of items today. So if we did want to avoid that situation, it would have been preferable to have had this debate on the 20th of May. However, in terms of the library, I really do not want to see us have cuts to core services, and the library is a core service. And in terms of spending money, I think if we were to ask residents, that would be very unhappy to think that the library would be one of those places that would take significant cuts. I just can't believe that we've got to the point in this council where we're considering that we need to cut the purchase of library books. And I think this would be a very small increase in OPEX, but it's significant. I'm really not prepared to sit here while we cut community services. That's the core reason why I'm on this council, is to stand up for the community and in terms of the services that we provide to the city. And there's a whole lot that I could have got into in this budget, but this is one that really hurts me. And I'm just not going to be prepared to vote for cuts in library books. And I hope that you're not either.
Are there any further comments? Councillor Dennison.
I can hear where Councillor Johnston's coming from. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. However, I could take the same lens and start advocating for everything around the sports budget that's been proposed, or the arts budget that's been proposed, or what other budgets are being proposed. You've got to come to a point, and I think we're here now, where there's been enormous work done by officers. There are programs that have been proposed with decreases that we aren't happy with, but overall, I think we're very comfortable to go out with a 1.95 annual budget for next year. And the difference of a few books in the library, I think we've still got thousands of books in the library. I don't think it's cutting the level of service at all. Also, if you're talking about the library, we're going to be spending millions on the library in the next few years on earthquake strengthening and capital provision. And I just don't see this decision being highlighted as being that we're shortcutting community services because we're cutting a few books in the library. The library's got thousands of books. We're going to be spending millions on the library, and I don't see it that way. And I'm not precious about different, sectors that we care a lot about when we're talking, fairly minor amounts. I think we've got to get to the point to let's back the staff, back the officers to do this annual budget where we all had an intent to reduce the rate increase, and that's my general comment over whatever other program gets proposed. And so therefore I'm going to oppose this recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson, sorry, Councillor Naylor, I'll go to you first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I withheld comment at the last item, but now that there is a second one, I do want to just point out that over the years, there has been significant criticism of relitigating decisions or not accepting the majority decision of council. And I think what's happening here today is that there was a majority decision made 3 weeks ago to adopt Appendix 4 in its entirety. And if we continue to go down this track, we're relitigating a majority decision of council, and I don't think that's appropriate. So I won't be supporting this.
Councillor Johnson, if I could just ask a question of you, please. So it's just gone dead. So the amendment here is around referring that back to the 10-year plan, or are you locking it into the 10-year plan? That means we can't debate it in next year.
No, sorry. The intention, and I hope it was worded this way, was to restore the budget to the 10-year plan level. So I asked the CFO about the disparity between the cuts in the library budget in Appendix 4 compared to the annual budget document. And he indicated that the funding had been even higher than that was planned this year, but that the 10-year plan budgeting is about $160,000 more than what is currently in the budget for library renewals.
Okay, so you are wanting to pull this back into this coming budget?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Could I suggest that that is added to because it is, I actually thought this was referring it back to the 10-year plan.
Maybe if we add amount after budget, maybe that makes it clearer.
Yeah, and reinstate, maybe the word reinstate rather than restore.
Yeah, I'm happy with reinstate.
Okay. All right, I will make a comment.
If the seconder is happy with it, sorry.
Second is happy? Okay, good. All right, I would just like to make a comment. I was quite happy to, we've got to cut our cloth, councillors. We're 2 days into level 1 or whatever it is, and I'm very optimistic the city will bounce back, but it's very brittle out there commercially, and a lot of us live in the public world, which is slightly more sheltered. So I just want to emphasise people's ability to pay we do need to cut our cloth. So if this was going back to the 10-year plan and we have a look at it for next year, I'd be more than happy to support this, because I do agree with Councillor Johnson that the library is important, but I do agree with Councillor Dennison too that we need to stop picking our pet projects. So I won't be supporting this for this year, but I would definitely support a reinstatement back into the 10-year plan, because we do need to cut our cloth, councillors. So I won't be supporting it. Thank you. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be supporting this one, and it does break my heart a little bit to say that, because I am a huge, huge fan of the library. I've spent many years practically living there. I've got 3 children who end up going to low decile schools, and a lot of their friends spend quite a lot of time at the library. However, we have just experienced COVID, and there is a lot of people who are really struggling to keep a roof over their heads at the moment. And I've been hearing a lot of complaints about the amount of money that council spends during this time. This budget cut, as Councillor Johnson refers it as, is really just the renewal of library books, really. You know, they do have quite a selection of books in the library at the moment. I do feel that it can take, you know, we don't have to spend quite so much money on it this year. But similar to what the Mayor said, you know, I'd be totally supportive to relook at that when we're doing our long-term plan. But I think for this year, we do actually have to make some tough decisions, just like everybody else in the country and the world at the moment. So I won't be supporting this one.
No further. I'll do this by division again. Thank you.
Councillor Rutherford.
For.
For. Councillor Petrinas.
Against.
Against. Councillor Barrett.
For.
For. Councillor Meehan.
Against.
Against. Councillor Butt.
For.
For. Councillor Dingwall.
Against.
Against. Councillor Harbetter. Against. Councillor Bowen.
Against.
Against. Mayor Smith.
Against.
Against. Councillor Beattie. Against. Councillor Hancock. Against. Councillor Johnson.
For.
For. Councillor Dennison. Against. Councillor Naylor.
Against.
Against. Deputy Mayor Tukiri.
For.
For. Oh, Councillor. My apologies, Councillor Finney. I hadn't seen you arrive.
So the amendment has failed. 5 votes for, 10 against, and 1 abstention. Thank you. Right, we'll move back to the substantive motions that are here, please. So, yes, with the amendments, yeah, adopt the amended annual budget 2020-21 as circulated with the report titled Finalising Annual Budget Plan 2021. I'll take them separately if that's all. Are we okay to do them all together unless somebody wants to take them separately? Councillor?
Can I just ask a question before you put that regarding the wording in recommendation 2? Now that that amendment has been passed, does the deficit amount need to be changed in that recommendation? Stuart. The recommendation 2 that has got the deficit amount included, given the amendment that was passed, does that deficit amount need to be changed?
Very slightly, yes. We think 3.95 or 3.96 perhaps, don't know the exact number, but perhaps if we change it to 3.95 for the purpose of the meeting, we think that'll be close enough to get us through.
And the other one of 6.83, will that need to be changed?
Sorry, yes, same thing. If we change it to 6.84.
Thank you.
Hang on. Yeah, I know what Steve's going to say. Some of that has some revenue attached. We don't know the exact number. So those numbers will change. Perhaps if we needed, we could change the wording to including the amendment or something of those, whatever the number turns up after we do the... because it's a little bit hard for us to give you an exact number right now.
We normally have a rider there that there is some minor amendments or adjustments that the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and CEO... Oh, okay. All right, we have got that.
In terms of the recommendation, what we're asking you to approve is a budget deficit. The exact number, I think we can get right in terms of the document.
Okay.
Sorry, are we taking 1 and 2 separately?
I'm just asking the meeting, okay. What would you like to do? I'm quite happy to take them all together.
No, I'd like 1 and 2 separately.
Okay, all right, we'll take them one. That's what I just needed to know. All right, we'll start with number 1, which is, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. That we adopt the amended annual budget 2020-21 as circulated with the report titled Finalising the Annual Budget Plan 2020-21. I'll look to seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and I'll open it up for any comments, but I just would like to just make the first comment, please, that I just want to councillors that in the business of budgeting, it is very wise to be conservative. And like my previous comments, we're 2 days into level 1, and although I'm very, very optimistic that the city will bounce back very, very well, we do have to be cautious, and it's wise to do that. We have to cut our cloth. We absolutely. And look, if there is extra revenue, the CE has said to us that they may come back to us or will come back to us. And look, it has been our policy in the past to pay off debt. And again, that's just wise heads, wise thinking. The savings reductions that we've asked from officers are not us, and that was deliberate, and for all the reasons I've outlined before. Every sector in our community has had to take some of this. So everybody has shared the pain. Art, sport, business, community, the environment. Every business unit has also been asked to find some cost savings. And they've been hard. They've been really hard, because we did give the CE quite a challenge about not diminishing the level of service that Palmerstonians and visitors enjoy. Overall, our rates are moderate compared to many in New Zealand, certainly compared to our neighbours around us, but also our metro sector of where we are properly measured and officially recognised. So councillors, please do support this. It is a balanced budget. We're responding to submissions too. And quite often we do get criticised at times for perhaps not following what submitters have asked us. But this time we have really listened. We've been empathetic, recognising people's ability to pay, and it has been compromised. But also we've tried to keep some level of progress going so the city can keep moving, because we will bounce back, but it will take some time. So please, let's be wise here, approve what is really a very balanced recovery budget. Thank you. I'll open it up for any other comments. Councillor Johnson and Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have to say that I am not comfortable with this annual budget. I would have been comfortable with reducing the rates rise from 4.4 to 3.3, and even being comfortable with some of the proposed cuts to take it lower than 3.3. But once we started getting into trying to get it under 2% to have the political headline of a rates increase that was under 2%, that was when I stopped being comfortable with this budget. Councillors, I think I should bring to your attention that there are significant risks in this budget. There are risks, although the CE has to be very careful in what she says, but there are clear risks of redundancies. How does making staff redundant from council support the recovery? There are risks with inadequate funding of renewals, and the CFO alluded to that in the fact that we're being asked to approve a deficit budget because the depreciation isn't being fully covered by the level of renewals. And I did ask a couple of questions about that, and of course, staff have to be careful in what they say. I think we can all read between the lines that this budget is light on renewals, and we will be needing to pay for those renewals next year and the year after and the year after that. And the impact of this very low rates increase this year will be felt in years to come. Just because officers are not able to give us a figure right now of the impact in future years doesn't mean that next year there won't be some rebound effect from making cuts now. I'm very worried about our ambitious programme and the effect that we're having on council's ability to deliver on the projects that we want by cutting so deep. We're cutting into service levels for the library, for community, for sports fields, for the arts. And I'm not sure that that will support the recovery in the city. And I'm not sure that it's what the majority of people in the city actually want. Bearing in mind, we received 45 submissions on the annual plan. Obviously, because people were preoccupied, I understand that. But we're talking extremely low numbers in a city of nearly 90,000 people. So to try and hang your hat on budget cuts because fewer than 45 people responded to your budget, I think is pushing things a little bit too far. If we look at the rates affordability benchmark, that would give us an affordability benchmark of 4.5%. Now, no one's suggesting we put the rates at 4.5%, but at 1.95, we are well below that affordability benchmark. My estimate for an average ratepayer is that the 1.95% will result in an increase of approximately $1 a week to their rates. And if it were 2.5, it might be $1.25. Now, I don't think that difference of 25 cents is hugely significant compared to the cuts that we're having to approve here. Well, I won't be approving them, but some of you obviously will. I just don't think it's significant. And I would like to remind councillors, I think it's ironic that we've heard comments about relitigation. I quite enjoyed them. I'd like to remind councillors that the extra 550,000 was only passed by a narrow majority of 9 votes to 7. 9 votes to 7. So I will leave it there. I think I've made myself quite clear.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really pleased to say that I'm very happy to support this annual budget, and it's a significant decision for me, particularly given that in 4 years of annual budgets, this will be the first one that I actually support, and it does feel good. I think that it strikes a really good balance to progressing the very important work of council, but in a responsible way, and it gives appropriate consideration to those experiencing hardship in the lockdown of COVID. I think what the majority of council asked the CE to do 3 weeks ago was a very difficult ask, and I'd like to acknowledge the professional and careful and considered way that the CE and staff responded to that request. I think what we see in the budget that's in front of us is significant increase in the expense and the investment that we'll make into the city in the next year, an increase on the annual on this current year's budget, and an increase on the long-term plan budget. It's also an increase in funding of renewals than what was anticipated in the long-term plan. And I think some of that has been achieved through the benefit of us only having to, us having to pay a whole lot less in interest. In fact, $6 million less in interest. And I think there's obviously some really good benefits to that. So yeah, just want to acknowledge over the last few months the incredible work that staff have put into this in very challenging times with COVID and with having to adjust and adapt in a rapid way. And I know that's been a tremendous amount of work by many people. So I really want to just acknowledge that. And I think what we have in front of us is I hope will be acceptable to the majority of the community, and I'm confident it's a balanced and responsible approach.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just want to follow up on what Councillor Naylor and the Mayor has said. I think this is a really good way forward. I think most of the community and businesses across the community will really respect what we have done. We have made good cuts. I think the CE and her team have done a really good job going forward, and I think we need to pat them on the back because it's been a hard job for what they have done and come back to us, and I think it's well done to them. I don't think it's been an easy job, and I think listening to what Councillor Johnson has said, yep, I think some of those cuts have been hard, but I think the CE has made those decisions, and we have to respect her role and what she has done. And I think she's done a very good job. But yep, it's a good budget, and it's a budget for this year. It's going to be a tough year going forward, and we have to respect that, but it's a good decision for the council. So thank you very much.
Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I won't be supporting recommendation 1. I'm really quite unhappy with this budget, and in previous years have been pretty supportive of the budgets we've pulled together. I think it'd be quite naive to think that this is not a budget that is reducing our level of service quite significant in some areas. Because levels of service can't not reduce with a budget like this and a very small budget. I guess there's the main reason that I'm unhappy with it is I think that we haven't been able to consider the impact of this budget in future years, and through the long-term plan process, we're in a position where we do get to see the impact of where we place different programs and where we choose to spend. And every long-term plan, I've been a part of 2. The 2 long-term plans I've been a part of, we have always sought to flatten the curve or reshuffle things to make sure that we don't have big highs and big lows, that it's a bit more manageable for people. And I am quite concerned about what this budget is going to do when it comes to looking at renewals through the long-term plan. I guess the other thing is that our community is going to see quite a different service from this council in the coming months. And I don't think that there is any awareness of that in the community. And I don't think that there is a desire for that. I think through our communications through COVID, we came out really strongly to say, actually, we are going to be part of the group leading the charge when it comes to recovery, and we are going to be supporting the local economy and keeping things moving. And I see this budget as contradicting that in certain ways. And so for me, I'm not comfortable with that. And so for the first time since I've been on council, I won't be supporting that.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm quite surprised when I hear discussions around the renewals and the long-term plan, because an annual plan budget is only tweaking the long-term plan, and we haven't made no big ticket items in this budget that can compound into the long-term plan. We heard reports last week regarding some of the conditions of our assets, and when we sit into the long-term plan, and I mean we're starting those discussions already for the long-term plan, that's where we'll sit, and those discussions will be over the next 10 years. I think this is a balanced budget. I think we've been very sensible. We didn't want to be in a situation where we had to cut costs in 5 months' time because there's unknown impacts to our revenue. The team, the CEO, the management, ELT team have done a tremendous job, and I think have been very fair, because in past when we've asked them to cut back on OPEX and things like that, it's been very biased and swayed. So I think they've done an excellent job on this. We've stayed out of pet projects, and I think overall, yes, I would, we'd all like different things, but I think it sits with me in a balanced way. My last comment would be that I keep hearing about, the impact on residential people and that it's only $1.25 a week. Councillors, we've got businesses in the city and they pay 20% of our rates, and an extra 2% rate increase is the difference between them possibly not renewing their leases and having further people on the streets. So we've got to remember that we're supporting not only residences but businesses, and we have too many conversations about the residential side of it. So just remember that a 1 to 2% impact for our commercial and business is horrendous in their bottom line in this environment. So I will be supporting the recommendation.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I feel a bit like the jam in the sandwich in this one, because I'm really not happy. I'm really not happy with this budget. But having said that, I think I will support it. So I find myself horribly conflicted internally. There are elements that I really have struggled with. There are some of these cuts that feel personal to me and have cost me sleepless nights. And I'm sure for many of you, that's the same. And I absolutely respect the views of councillors who've shared those particular elements that they've struggled with. I will preface these comments by saying thank you to the staff who've done all of this work, and to the CE for leading out on that last round of cuts that we asked for. But I was actually surprised by the list that came in today's papers for the changes, including to meet that 1.9%, 5%, that some of those things should have been at the beginning of this process, not right at the end. And that does flag for me that there is possibly some further work to do there on how we run our budgets. We were assured by the CFO that there was no fat in the system, and then we seem to have found some fat. So that's good to note for future reference. I would say that the CE didn't make these decisions about where the council cuts will land. We sent her away to find some cuts, and she's brought them back here. And this decision is ours. The Appendix 4 decision is ours. We didn't debate them, but we made that decision. Some of those decisions, some elements within that, I definitely don't agree with. But as Councillor Naylor pointed out, that is a majority decision of council and majority rules. It seems to me that our emphasis for recovery has fallen into an emphasis on infrastructure and building. And that's great. That's useful. That serves us well, but it's not the whole story, and it won't continue to be the whole story. And my concern is that where the cuts are landed is in our community, our social infrastructure, and there will be a price to pay for that. And as Councillor Rutherford said, we don't know what that's going to look like going into an LTP round. But going into an LTP round gives me some hope, some confidence that we can actually have a good look at the impact. And some of these will be unintended impacts of where the cuts have landed, and we can look to get our house in order, bearing in mind that our house will look quite different post-COVID to what it looked like pre-COVID. So grudgingly. And if there's a special voting category for a grudging vote for something, that's kind of where I'm sitting at the moment, which is something I'm really not happy with, because when I support something, I like to do it wholeheartedly, and this doesn't have my wholehearted support. It has my grudging support.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and just wanted to briefly comment both around process and around where that process is now brought us to. And in reflecting on that process, I am, I guess, disappointed that we set it up in a way, and we did it at this table, that sheltered the CapEx side of things. And then, you know, some people have called it trimming. Others have called it maybe shaving or adjusting. The reality is cutting a whole lot of operating programs. And we did that first by sweeping in Appendix 4 without debate. And I found that to be particularly just disappointing that we weren't actually willing to own those decisions at a more specific level than we did. And then doing that, we then went and, you know, handed the chief executive the knife for the second round of cuts that we've seen now. And so, to my mind, when I look back at actually from the long-term plan, which was a 5-point something, through to the consult, which is a 4-point something, to now drive it down below 2%, I think is actually quite deep cuts, and in my view, some of those quite unnecessary. We will see effects, obviously, in the next 12 months, and I think, as other councillors have alluded to, an echo well beyond that in the future. In particular, going after the OPEX, the operating costs, to my mind, that quite heavily impacts and disproportionately impacts within goals 2 and goals 3. Those goals are principally driven through operating. And so in supporting this, if we were to support this as a council, we would be, to my view, disproportionately targeting some of the most vital parts of our community around the vibrancy and around the safe and connected. Did want to comment a little bit. I've heard it a few times this morning, and obviously here in another context, this sort of euphemism of the pet project. Anytime somebody wants to attack something, it's really easy to put a label on it. And one of those labels that gets wheeled out quite early on is pet project, as though it's something that is an individual interest rather than a community interest. And perhaps there's cases where that's appropriate, but I really struggle with something that is as central to the community as the library, that we have screeds of data over years and years and years that shows the value of that institution to this community. To just trivialize that as a pet project suddenly, I find that to be quite distasteful in terms of how we actually seek to represent the community. And I'd hope that we use labels with greater care in the future, because I think we've trivialized some things this morning that are in fact anything but. So in terms of where I'm at on this budget, we have cut, and we've cut too deep in my view, and in a depth that doesn't actually optimize the recovery, and I think probably you know, is going to come at the longer term cost of the community. So I'm not in a position to support the budget this morning with my vote, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies that I wasn't here for the whole debate, but unfortunately I had a previous commitment I had to fulfill. Now, some of the cuts that are mentioned here, I have great difficulty with. I've never ever, in all the time I've been on council, ever supported a cut to the library, because I think the library is an essential part of our community. But we have to look at what our community wants. And I've just been at a meeting, and the message I got from that meeting more than anything else was we have to support local. We have, and the comments to me were the council have got to do something to support local businesses, to help them over this hurdle. And having a rates increase under 2%, even though it does have detrimental effect in other ways and in long term, which I accept, is helping our local businesses because it's keeping their costs down in the forthcoming year. And the one thing that I am sure of when I'm listening to the community is they don't mind if it helps our businesses continue and allow them to exist past COVID. The community in Palmerston North is supporting our local businesses, and they expect the council to do so also. So a 1.95% rate increase. One of the things it is doing is supporting our local businesses. There will be detrimental effects in the coming years. I accept that. But at the moment, we have to look at the situation and cut our cloth to fit. So I will support these recommendations.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just firstly like to commend the CE and the management for the job they've done. We put it to them to bring back a 1.95 budget rates increase, and they've done so. I've heard the term pet projects used, and it's very real and alive, pet projects. The library, I wouldn't see that called under the pet project scheme, though. I think there's not a councillor in this room that would not support the library. But we've asked the CE to make cuts. Sorry, Councillor. The CE to make cuts, and the CE's done that. The management team have done that. And I think today we need to express our thanks to them, support them. This is about supporting the community. There are people out there hurting. I suggest not many around this table are, but people out there are really hurting, and this rates increase is about supporting them, supporting our local business. We need to do it. And yes, going forward, it may bounce back on us a bit later on in years, but we just need to manage that as well. Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure whether to praise the CE or the councillors, because councillors are claiming that we asked CE to do that and she has done it or her team has done it. I'm not sure who's to praise, number one. Number two, when we say that we should support the local businesses, is that local businesses supporting local businesses or people? We need people to support the businesses as well. If you are making common people unhappy with certain actions, how could we say that we are supporting the local businesses? If there are no people, there will be no business. So you have to look for the people's interest first. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Nobody else wishes to make comment? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Won't come as any surprise that I'm supporting the recommendation. I'd made my comments clear, I think, 3 weeks ago around the rationale for doing so. The reality is that we do have to make some difficult decisions. Yes, I accept that Appendix of Schedule 4 was passed by a majority without debate. And I know I've received some criticism around that from the community, but I stand by that decision. Just like I stand by the comment I made at the time that it's open to any elected member to challenge that moving forward if they do. So I respect the right of members this morning to raise issues if they think that is warranted. The point of difference, I think, is that where matters have been relitigated in the past, there hasn't been a level of support for that. So I think it's really important that people that are fronting or wanting to relitigate things can read the room and understand whether there is a general level of support for wanting to move forward with that. As I mentioned 3 weeks ago, we're in a whole different environment, and for me, Yes, I'll acknowledge those that have done some work in bringing what we have in front of us to the table today, but it strikes an affordable balance for our community, our residents, our businesses, including the commercial tenants. But I think it's within a new environment. So on that basis, it is difficult, but I will be supporting the annual budget.
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll just, as a right of reply, again, I would ask you to please support this. Look, I do understand some of you are disappointed with the process, but it was a majority decision. I do remind you of that, and I've been on the other side of that at times too. Everyone's taking cuts. You can't say nobody is, and some of us live in different worlds. But I do want you to just think of the warehouse worker, think of the Air New Zealand pilot, think of the Copthorne staff member, think of the retail worker, think of the hospitality sector person that has been laid off. We've got to think of the wider community, people. I admit that we've got some real challenges coming, and actually the prioritisation will come in the long-term plan as well. And I think we're looking through rose-tinted glasses if we think things have not changed. They have changed. So please, there is some balance in this. We are trying to keep the foot on the pedal as much as we can. I'm not denying there will be some change, but it is absolutely necessary. To keep going out with the same old rate increase, I think, is naive, and you are not appreciating the real situation out there. So please do support this recommendation. Thank you. We'll go to division.
Councillor Butt. Against. Councillor Bowen. For. Councillor Rutherford.
Against.
Against. Councillor Hapeta. For. Councillor Beatty. For. Councillor Naylor. For. Deputy Mayor Tukeru. For. Mayor Smith. For. Councillor Petrunas. For. Councillor Dennison. For. Councillor Meehan. For. Councillor Hancock. For. Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Against. Councillor Barrett.
Against.
Against. Councillor Finlay. For. Councillor Dingwall.
For.
For.
And the motion is passed. 12 votes for, 4 against. Right, councillors. We'll look to the second recommendation there, the third, the fourth and the fifth. Are we comfortable taking those all together? And we will take a break after that. All right, I'll look to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Johnson.
Just to recommendation 2, that I have got some disquiet about the level of budgeted deficit. And whilst I understand that the CFO has explained it, this is starting to be a trend. And I'm a bit concerned that although we're saying it's a paper deficit, that ultimately we are not adequately funding renewals, and that if we were, some of this paper deficit wouldn't be there. And so I'm just sounding that note of caution. I will vote to approve it now, but I think we need to be aware of what this means. And it isn't, with respect, just a paper deficit. It does tell us something about the state of the budget.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more comments? And I sort of do agree with you that this is not ideal. I mean, ideally, we would want to be showing either a small surplus or balance. But I think the reasons have been explained around some of the work that we're doing at the moment, certainly around our financial systems budget, and bringing that in very, very quickly, which was absolutely necessary. So I do share some of your concerns, but I'm confident that we will right the ship Okay, we'll do this by voice if that is okay, unless somebody wants to do division. Okay. All right, all those in favour? Aye. Against? That is carried unanimously. All right, thank you, councillors, thank you, staff. We need to declare the Committee of Council meeting for the Wednesday the 10th of June closed. Thank you. And I will pass back to Councillor Rutherford for planning. We will reconvene at quarter to 12. Thank you.